Welcome to Empathy Stories, where we explore powerful tales of love, kindness, and transformation. In today's story, we meet Jonathan, a man who once had it all, but chose to walk away from wealth and luxury in search of true love. Little did he know, the path to authenticity would be harder than he ever imagined. Join us as we discover how one act of kindness changed his life forever. The city of Redwood was as bustling as any large metropolis. But within its vibrant streets, there were hidden corners where the weight of life's hardships bore down heavier than the shine of its gleaming skyscrapers. Downtown Square, at the heart of it all, was a place where the people of all walks of life crossed paths, their fates intertwined by the ebb and flow of the market. Among the crowds, there sat Jonathan, in his wheelchair, his body twisted, his clothes torn and dirty, his face hidden beneath a mess of tangled hair. He had once been the son of Robert Hill, one of the wealthiest men in Redwood, known for his towering mansion that loomed over the city. Jonathan had never known what it was to worry about money or where his next meal would come from. His life had been one of luxury, framed by expensive clothes, designer cars, and lavish vacations. But none of that mattered now. Not anymore. Sitting in the corner of downtown Square, Jonathan was nothing like the man he had once been. His wheelchair, an old, creaky thing, barely moved over the cobblestone streets. He had worn his finest suit when he first set out on this journey. But now, it was little more than rags hanging from his frame. The riches that had once defined him were no more than distant memories, fading with each passing day. People walked past him without a glance. The life he had once known was but a shadow, and the person he had been, a charming young man admired by all, was buried beneath the guise of a beggar. Young women passed by him, their eyes filled with disdain, some even pointing and laughing as they walked. Look at him, begging for coins. Does he think anyone would want someone like him? One girl whispered loudly, her laughter ringing in the air like a sharp knife. Jonathan lowered his head, feeling the sting of her words like a slap to the face. His fists clenched tightly in his lap, not because he couldn't defend himself, but because the ache in his heart was more than he could bear. They had no idea who he truly was. They didn't know that beneath the torn clothes and crippled legs, he was still Jonathan Hill, son of one of the wealthiest men in the city. He was still strong, powerful, and capable, at least, he told himself he was. But none of that mattered here. Not in this square. Not in this life he had chosen for himself. He had deliberately abandoned everything. Everything that was meant to make him happy. He had left behind the comforts of his father's mansion, the luxury of a life lived without worry, all in pursuit of something more valuable than any material possession. Jonathan was searching for something money could never buy. He wanted to know what it felt like to be loved for who he truly was, not for the name he carried or the wealth that came with it. Before leaving the mansion, his father had tried to persuade him, to reason with him, to stop this foolishness before it was too late. But Jonathan, stubborn and determined, was not swayed. Jonathan, his father had said with pleading eyes, "You don't need to do this. You can have anything you want. Why pretend to be something you're not? You have everything, a life of comfort, of success. Why throw it all away?" Jonathan had looked his father in the eye, his decision already made, his heart heavy with the weight of it. "I need to do this, Father. If I can't find someone who will love me as a poor, crippled man, then they can't love me as Jonathan Hill, your son." His mother had stood beside his father, tears welling in her eyes. She had known there was no stopping him once his mind was set. She had tried, but Jonathan was resolved. He could feel their love and concern, but it wasn't enough to sway him. This was something he had to do for himself. That morning, Jonathan had wheeled himself away from the gates of the mansion for the last time. The sprawling estate that had once been his home, the marble floors, the sweeping gardens, the elegant cars, all left behind. He didn't take anything with him except the clothes on his back and a small, worn-out wheelchair. He didn't need anything more. He wanted to strip away the luxuries of his life, to find someone who would see him as he truly was, without the trappings of wealth and status. As the wheels of his chair scraped across the cobblestones, he glanced back one final time at the mansion perched high above the city, its grandeur casting a long shadow over him. His heart ached, but he knew in his soul that this was the only way. He would find love, real love, or he would find nothing at all. The marketplace, at the center of the city, was a constant flurry of activity. Stalls lined the square, filled with merchants selling their wares. The smell of street food in the air, the sounds of bargaining and laughter mixed with the hum of the city. It was a world full of life. But to Jonathan, it felt like an alien place. He was no longer the man he had once been, the man who had been sought after by so many for his charm, his good looks, and the wealth that came with his family name. Now, he was just another beggar on the street, no different than the others who sat at the edges of the square, hoping for a few coins. Day after day, Jonathan returned to the square, positioning himself in the same corner. He would sit in his wheelchair, with a small tin cup in front of him. Occasionally, someone would drop a coin into the tin, but most people simply walked by without a glance. It was as if he didn't even exist. The young women who once swooned over him now ignored him, too proud to even acknowledge his presence. When they did glance at him, it was often with disdain, laughing at his situation. The harsh words cut him deep, but he said nothing. He had made his choice, and he was determined to see it through. The days stretched into weeks, and the loneliness weighed on Jonathan. His hands ached from pushing the wheelchair over the rough cobblestone streets. His body was sore from the long hours spent sitting, waiting, hoping for someone to notice him. But no one did, not in the way he had hoped. He had come here to find love, to be seen as a man, not a beggar. But it seemed as if the world had already made up its mind about who he was. He began to doubt his decision. Was this really the right path? Would anyone ever look at him and see beyond his crippled form, beyond the wheelchair that defined him now? He had longed for a life of authenticity, but now he wasn't so sure. Perhaps he had made a mistake. Maybe no one would ever love him. Not truly. Maybe he would spend the rest of his life hiding in this square, alone and invisible to the world. As the sun began to set on yet another long day in the square, Jonathan's spirits were at their lowest. He sat quietly in his chair, lost in his thoughts, when suddenly a shadow fell over him. Looking up, he was taken aback by the sight of a young woman standing in front of him. She wasn't like the others. Her face was kind, her eyes filled with genuine concern. She knelt beside him, her voice soft as she asked, "Are you okay?" Jonathan didn't know how to respond. He had been invisible for so long that someone acknowledging his presence felt surreal. She wasn't laughing at him, wasn't mocking him. She was simply offering him something he hadn't expected: human kindness. "Here," she said, extending a small cloth-wrapped bundle toward him. "I thought you might be hungry." For a moment, Jonathan just stared at her, stunned by her kindness. No one had offered him anything like this since he had come to the square. His heart swelled with emotion, but he didn't know how to express it. He took the food from her hands, his own shaking slightly. "What's your name?" she asked, sitting beside him without hesitation. There was no pity in her voice, only genuine curiosity. "Jonathan," he replied quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm Emily," she said with a smile that reached her eyes. And just like that, everything began to change for Jonathan. For the first time in a long time, someone had seen him for who he truly was, not for his wheelchair, not for his wealth, but for the person he was beneath it all. And in that moment, Jonathan felt something stir inside him, a hope he hadn't felt in a long time. Days turned into weeks, and every day Emily came back to Jonathan. Each time she visited, she brought something small: food, a blanket, sometimes just a smile. Her presence, so unassuming and genuine, was like a light breaking through the fog of Jonathan's solitude. She never seemed to notice his disheveled clothes or the wheelchair that confined him. Instead, she sat with him, talking to him as if they were longtime friends, not strangers caught in an unexpected encounter. It was the simplest form of kindness, but to Jonathan, it was the greatest gift he had ever received. Their conversations were like a balm to his wounded soul. They spoke of everything and nothing. Emily would tell him stories of the small joys in her life, her dreams, the things that made her laugh, her love for books, and her quiet life in a modest home on the outskirts of the village. Jonathan, in turn, shared memories of his former life, of the wealth and privilege he had grown up with, but with no bitterness, just quiet reflection. He was careful, though, never to reveal the truth of who he was. There were moments when he thought about telling her, but he always held back. He wanted to be loved for who he was now, not for the legacy of his family. The villagers, however, weren't as kind as Emily. They began to take notice of the friendship blossoming between Jonathan and Emily. And it didn't take long before the gossip started. They whispered behind Emily's back, calling her foolish for spending time with a man in a wheelchair. Why would she waste her time with someone like him, they sneered. He can't even walk. Does she think she's some kind of saint? The cruel words stung. But Emily never let them see it. She didn't flinch, didn't back down. She continued to visit Jonathan every day, sitting by his side, offering him food and companionship. No matter what the others said, her strength and resilience began to shine through. And Jonathan admired her more with each passing day. He saw in her something he had never expected to find: true beauty. A beauty not in her appearance, but in her heart. One afternoon, as they sat together in the corner of the square, the sun shining gently on them, Emily smiled at Jonathan. "You know, I've been thinking," she said, her voice soft. "People don't see you for who you really are." Jonathan looked at her, a mixture of confusion and curiosity in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Emily continued, "they don't see the man who's sitting in front of me, the man who's strong and kind, who has so much to offer. They only see the wheelchair, the rags, the stories they've created about you. But that's not you. Jonathan, you're more than that." Her words hit him harder than he could have anticipated. For the first time in a long while, Jonathan felt seen, not as the heir to a vast fortune, not as a crippled beggar, but as a person, a man with his own worth, his own strength, his own humanity. Emily had stripped away all the pretenses, all the barriers he had built around himself, and had simply looked at him, really looked at him. The realization was both humbling and overwhelming. He had longed for someone to love him, to see him for who he truly was. But now that he had found her, he wasn't sure what to do with that love. A part of him wanted to tell her the truth, to reveal the man he had once been, to show her that he wasn't just a beggar. But another part of him, perhaps the deepest part, feared that she would see him differently once she knew the truth. "Why do you keep coming back?" Jonathan asked one day, his voice laced with a mix of wonder and fear. "Why do you care about me? I'm nothing. I'm just a crippled beggar in the eyes of everyone else." Emily looked at him, her expression steady and kind. "Because I see you, Jonathan. I see who you are inside. It's not about what you have or don't have. It's not about the wheelchair. It's about the person you are. And I care because that person matters." The simplicity of her words left Jonathan speechless. He had never heard anything like it before. No one had ever looked past his status, his wealth, his family, to see who he truly was. But Emily did. And in that moment, Jonathan realized that he had been searching for the wrong things all along. He had been searching for love, yes, but more importantly, he had been searching for someone who could see beyond the surface, beyond the wealth and the appearance, to the soul beneath it all. Despite the growing whispers of the villagers, Emily continued to visit Jonathan every day. The more time they spent together, the more Jonathan realized that his feelings for her were deepening. She had become his confidant, his friend, his anchor in the storm. In her presence, he felt safe from the judgments of others, safe from the weight of his past, safe from the fear that had held him captive for so long. One afternoon, as they sat in their usual spot, the harsh laughter of the villagers reached their ears. A group of young women walked past, casting disdainful glances at Emily. "What's she doing with him?" One of them snickered. "She's just wasting her time. Why bother with someone who's never going to be anything more than a beggar?" Jonathan felt the familiar sting of their words. But this time, it was different. This time, it wasn't about him. It was about Emily. The pain he felt was for her, for the way she was being treated because of her kindness to him. He hated it, hated that she had to endure their cruel words just for being kind to him. It hurt him more than he was willing to admit. Emily, however, remained unfazed. She sat tall, her head held high, and continued to smile at Jonathan, as though nothing had changed. To her, the opinions of the villagers didn't matter. She didn't care what they thought. She cared about Jonathan, and that was enough. Jonathan looked at her, admiration swelling in his chest. He had underestimated her strength. She was not only kind, but she was resilient. She stood up for what she believed in, even if it meant enduring the scorn of others. And in that moment, Jonathan realized something else. He was falling in love with her. It wasn't just her kindness, her resilience, or her ability to see him for who he was that drew him to her. It was the way she made him feel. With Emily, he felt like a man again, not someone defined by his wheelchair, not someone reduced to a beggar, but someone capable of love, of strength, of standing on his own 2 feet, even if only metaphorically. But even as his feelings for Emily deepened, Jonathan's fear grew. Should he tell her the truth about who he really was? Could he risk it? Could he bear the thought of losing her once she knew the truth? The weight of his secret was growing heavier with each passing day, and Jonathan found himself at a crossroads. Would Emily still love him if she knew the truth? Would she still see him as the man she had come to care for? Or would she only see the wealth he had left behind? The family he had distanced himself from? Would her feelings for him change? Would the love they had built on the foundation of honesty and kindness withstand the revelation of his past? The answers to those questions were beyond his reach. But as he sat beside Emily, watching her smile at him as though nothing in the world mattered except the 2 of them, he couldn't help but wonder if, perhaps, this was the love he had been searching for all along. As the days continued to pass in the market square, Jonathan's feelings for Emily deepened beyond what he ever imagined. She was a constant in his life now, his companion, his source of strength, and someone who truly saw him, despite the villagers' mockery, despite their cruel laughter and whispers. Emily never wavered. She continued to visit him daily, bringing him food, sharing stories, and talking about her day with the same kindness she had shown him from the very start. But for Jonathan, the truth of who he was weighed on him heavier with each passing day. His love for Emily was undeniable, but so was his fear of losing her. The more time he spent with her, the more he realized how deeply he had come to care for her, and the more terrified he became that she would turn away when she learned the truth. How could she continue to love a man who had hidden his real identity from her? What would she think when she found out he was not the crippled beggar he appeared to be, but the son of one of the wealthiest men in the city? As the weeks wore on, the tension grew unbearable. The villagers' ridicule of Emily only intensified. "Look at her," one woman whispered loudly as she passed. "Spending her time with someone who will never be anything more than a beggar. What a waste." Jonathan felt the sting of these words deeply. But this time, the pain wasn't just for himself. He could see how they affected Emily, how the constant judgment from the community was taking its toll. He had wanted to protect her from the harshness of the world. But instead, he had inadvertently dragged her into the very thing he was trying to escape. His fears of being unworthy, of being rejected for who he truly was, made him question whether he should even tell her the truth. Maybe it would be easier to keep pretending, to hide behind the persona he had created, and let her love him for the man he was pretending to be. But that wouldn't be fair to her. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting an orange glow over the market square, Jonathan could no longer hold back. The weight of his secret felt unbearable. The tension in his chest had built up over days, over weeks, until it became a pressure he could no longer ignore. "Emily," he said softly, his voice trembling with emotion. She was sitting next to him as usual, her hands resting gently in her lap. He could see the concern in her eyes as she looked up at him, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "Emily, there's something I need to tell you," Jonathan said again, his heart pounding in his chest. He took a deep breath, his hands shaking as he gripped the wheels of his chair. "I'm not who you think I am. I'm Jonathan Hill, the son of Robert Hill. I'm not really crippled. I've been pretending. All of this, it was all a lie." The words spilled out in a rush, and the world seemed to stand still as he waited for Emily's reaction. His chest felt tight, as if all the air had been sucked out of him. The silence that hung between them seemed like an eternity. Emily didn't speak at first. She didn't even move. Jonathan felt as if he might drown in the silence, his fear that she would reject him swallowing him whole. Finally, Emily spoke. "Why?" Her voice was soft, but there was no judgment in it, only curiosity. "Why did you do this?" Jonathan swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I wanted to know if someone could love me for who I really am, not for my family's name, not for the wealth I have. I wanted to see if you would care about me, and not about the life I was born into. I didn't want anyone to love me out of pity. Emily, I wanted to be loved for who I am." Emily sat quietly for a moment, her eyes studying Jonathan's face. Then, to his astonishment, she smiled. The smile wasn't one of pity, or disbelief, or shock. It was one of understanding. "Jonathan," she said softly, her voice filled with warmth, "I already love you. I love you. It wasn't your name, or your wealth, or your wheelchair that I loved. It was the person you are, the kindness, the heart, the soul inside. That's who I fell in love with." Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had expected anger, rejection, even betrayal. But instead, Emily was offering him love, understanding, and acceptance. His heart surged with emotion, and for the first time since he had left his father's mansion, he felt truly free. "You," Jonathan began, his voice breaking. "You love me? Even now, knowing who I really am?" Emily nodded, her smile never wavering. "I love you, Jonathan, not because of what you have, but because of who you are, and that's all that matters." Jonathan felt as though the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. He had feared that this moment, the moment of truth, would destroy everything he had come to cherish. But instead, it had only made their bond stronger. Emily's love had never been about wealth or appearance. It had always been about the person Jonathan truly was. As the days passed, Jonathan's life began to change in ways he had never imagined. The villagers continued to gossip, their whispers growing fainter in the face of Jonathan and Emily's unshakable bond. Emily continued to visit him every day, bringing with her not only food, but the warmth of her love. Together, they faced the world with strength and courage, their hearts intertwined. Jonathan's past, once a source of pride and shame, no longer defined him. He had found something far more valuable than money or status. He had found love, true love, love that saw beyond the surface, beyond the wheelchair, beyond the family name. Emily had loved him for who he was, not for what he had. And for that, Jonathan was more grateful than he could ever express. In Emily, Jonathan had found the love he had been searching for all his life. And with her by his side, he knew that nothing could stand in their way. They faced the world together, hand in hand, with the knowledge that love, in its truest form, had the power to overcome all obstacles. And so, Jonathan and Emily's journey continued, a story of love, honesty, and the strength to be true to oneself. In the end, it wasn't wealth, status, or appearance that mattered. It was the love they shared, pure and unwavering, that had become their greatest treasure. Thank you for joining us for Jonathan's incredible journey. His story is a powerful reminder that true love is not found in wealth or status, but in the genuine connections we make with others. If you enjoyed this heartfelt tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional and inspiring stories from Empathy Stories.